Hi, this is Scott Wilkinson, host of Home Theater Geeks. In episode 305, I chat with acoustician Bob Hodas about acoustic treatments and room tuning. So stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Home Theater Geeks is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Home Theater Geeks with Scott Wilkinson, recorded May 26, 2016. Episode 305, Acoustic Wisdom. This episode of Home Theater Geeks is brought to you by Epson's new EcoTank printers. With Epson's line of SuperTank all-in-one printers, you can print thousands of documents without running out of ink. EcoTank is loaded and ready to print when you are. Visit epson.com/ecotank to find out more. And by Optical Cables by Corning. Corning's incredibly durable Thunderbolt and USB 3-point optical cables are longer, thinner, lighter, and stronger. Go to opticalcablesbycorning.com to learn more. Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the Home Theater Geek and editor of avsforum.com. This week's guest geek is Bob Hodas, a noted acoustician who has tuned well over 1,000 rooms in his career. And so we're going to be talking about acoustics today. Hey, Bob, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Scott. Nice to be here again.
Yes, you were here about, close to 4 years ago. So I thought it's well past time to have you back. So thanks a lot for being here.
Well, usually I recommend a retune every couple of years. So you're a little late.
We're a little late on that. Okay, well, let's do some retuning today, shall we?
Yeah. But the laws of physics haven't changed in that time, though, so we're okay.
No, that's true. So I think we're okay. Hey, those of you who are tuned in live at live.twit.tv or logged into the chat room at irc.twit.tv can post questions as we go, and I'll pass along as many as I can. Be sure to use my screen name, which is my name, Scott Wilkinson, with no spaces, because that way it'll come up in a different color on my screen and my eye will be more naturally drawn to it. Now, Bob, you've done over 1,000 rooms, recording studios, homes, showrooms. You were telling me before we came on the air that you recently did a pretty interesting project. Let's start there.
Well, yeah, I did a showroom for a guy, and then he had a client who he had put some speakers into his house in San Francisco, and so I also went and did that space as well. And
so by showroom, you mean he's a retailer?
Well, yeah, there's a retailer had brought me in to do his showroom, and then he sent me to one of his clients' houses to set up the system that he had sold to the client,
okay,
to his customer.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing is that both of these rooms had a lot of problems with symmetry. And, I'm kind of a big nut on symmetry. And it's really important to me that the system be set up symmetrically within the space and that the space be as symmetrical as possible.
So you're talking about like a rectangular box of a room.
Yeah,
basically.
a rectangular room, or even if there are angled walls or something, that they're angled equally, the mirror image, kind of setup.
Uh-huh.
And that, that's really important for a number of reasons. But as it turned out, both of these rooms had huge symmetry issues. And so they were both a challenge in their own way. And, I'm always interested in learning something every day if I can. And these spaces taught me, my number one rule, which is, try to be as flexible as possible and don't follow any rule of thumb.
Good.
And these spaces really, put that to the test for me. It was really a lot of fun. And
Well, you and I both are very interested in learning something new every day, being open to learning rather than thinking that we know it all. So I'm really glad to hear you say that.
Well, thanks. So go ahead.
I was going to say, give us some more detail here. We have some pictures also, if you want to call them up by the names you gave them.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, the one thing that I should say is that I wasn't really thinking about doing this forum at the time. Doing your blog or
podcast.
And so I didn't take a lot of pictures. I wish I had, because then you could just see how screwed up these rooms really are. But let's start. Actually, I had done the showroom first, but let's start with the home first, because we're talking about people's homes here.
This is Home Theater Geeks, after all.
Home number one. Yeah, there's home number one, and I mean, from this picture, from this angle, it looks pretty good. You can see, though, you can tell right away that the speakers are set off center in the room, and with relation to the fireplace. And normally that's not something that I would have done. But
when I saw this picture, I thought the speakers were just sort of there temporarily, and that's not where they were going to end up. But is that the final position?
Well, that's actually that's not where they started out, and that was the best spot on that wall that we could possibly get.
Wow!
And I'll show you. I'm going to talk about a couple of things, and you can see we placed some bass traps over to the left-hand side on the floor. There's some big Geek acoustic bass traps there, and there are a couple behind, one in the corner behind the left speaker, and one actually out from the wall, even with the face of the fireplace, for doing some acoustical work in this space. And you can also see that it's pretty obvious that one speaker is a lot closer to a side boundary than the other. If you could just for a second show home number two, you can see what we're talking about here as far as how far off center the spaces are. There's a wall with some windows way off to the right, and then there's this big open space with the kitchen and a dining room and everything even way further on. So that has a huge effect on how the bass response is in the two speakers. So let's take a look at the picture called Home Fire FR. If you could bring that picture up.
Let's see. There it is.
Okay, there it is. So it's a little on my screen. It's a little tough to see, but there's a teal trace and there's a yellow trace. And the top window is our frequency response from 8 hertz to 200 hertz. And the bottom trace is the phase response. And you can see that, number one, you can see that these two responses don't match at all. And the top trace is
but they should, ideally?
Well, ideally, that's what you want. That's what you want. So, and the reason is that if you can get a good match left to right, then you get really fantastic center imaging, and you get a good movement of the spectrum left to right also. So it improves the imaging tremendously. So that's always what I'm shooting for, is to get something that, that really, really matches well left to right. Now we're just talking about the low end here. If we could go back to that, that home, that's that one. You can see, above, 60 hertz, we're sort of matched up in the, in the low end up to 200, sort of. This is high resolution, by the way. We're looking at 48th octave resolution, so it's never flat. Let me just say that. But you can see how crazy different the spectrum is below 50 hertz. And, one speaker the left speaker is kind of more loaded towards a side wall in a corner, and the right speaker is way out in free space.
Yeah.
And you can see that even the phase gets way off. And when those two speakers combine in mono, when the phase is so far off, then you get a lot more cancellations, and the imaging suffers. So we could go back to the picture if you want, the photo or whatever.
Sure.
But basically, that's the kind of thing that's a big red flag for me when I see that kind of mismatch. So we spent a lot of time, because the fireplace was the central focus of this room. Generally I'm going to try to do what the homeowner would like to see happen first, because the aesthetics of a living space are very important to people. And so I try to make that happen, but in a case like this, it didn't happen having the speakers symmetrically placed at this fireplace. I could show you other charts, but they're just even worse than what you just saw. So there's no sense in that. Right. So I ended up moving these speakers, everything sort of towards the wall. I got a better match, but I still didn't get anything that I would consider to be acceptable, especially for the type of speakers that this guy has. He had some, these Magico S1s or S5, Magico S5, sorry.
Those are really nice, really expensive speakers.
Yeah. And of course, just people will look at that picture and they'll go, well, those things are on wheels. And that's only because we hadn't finished placing the speakers and spiked them yet. Mm-hmm. So at any rate, what we ended up doing was going to the wall, putting the speakers on the wall that the window is on. I don't have a photo of that, but the walls came out far enough side to side that we could get a fairly symmetrical placement of the speakers with relationship to the left and right walls, and that loaded the bass more evenly for both of those. And
those are full range speakers, right?
Pardon?
Those are full range speakers.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, those are full range speakers. Oh yeah, let's go look at the chart called Home Window FR. Okay.
Mm-hmm. We'll pull that up.
Yeah. Okay, so now here's the match I ended up with by moving the speakers to the other wall. And you can see how low the speakers are going down to 10 hertz, in this room. There's a lot of subsonics there that generally you don't want to listen to, but these are definitely full range speakers. And we've got a much better match left to right, so we know we're going to get good imaging. We've got a whack in the phase on the left speaker. You can see that in the bottom window, but generally most of the phase is fairly well lined up. So when we mono these speakers up for the low end, it's we've gotten really good imaging here, and we took readjusted some of the bass traps. So it's a matter of being flexible, and the homeowner, thank goodness, was not. I mean, he really wanted the speakers, placed symmetrically with respect to the fireplace, but the speakers sounded so much better when we finally found the right spot on the window wall that he acquiesced, and we actually ended up, that trace that you see there, which is the trace we wound up, was actually a compromise. We had a better response out of the system, but because it placed him too far into his room with respect to his couch, we kept experimenting till we found a way to get him a little bit further back from the couch area, because the couch was set up to his left, and so he was sitting, viewing the window in a comfy chair, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So it was set up more, something that his wife would accept. So it.
Well, there is
wasn't as
always
good
the
as it could.
spousal acceptance factor. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, the fact is that it still sounded really, really good, way better than what it was when I walked in the door. And even with the compromise that we had to make, to get him into a seating zone that was comfortable aesthetically for him, visually, aesthetically for the household.
That must have been great to have a client who, okay, he wanted it to look good and symmetrical and so on, but in the end, he decided to put more weight on the sound quality, and if it didn't look quite the way he wanted it to, it sounded so much better that he was willing to compromise on the sight factor.
Yeah, well, it doesn't often happen that way. I mean, a lot of times we'll go into a space and the speakers can't move much more than 6 inches or a foot in any direction. And it's just the way it has to be. I've got a job like that coming up in a couple of weeks in Los Angeles. And at that point, because the system is so asymmetrically placed into the room, and generally there's a lot of furniture and things like that, the only real option at that point is equalization. Using a good high quality parametric EQ to try to balance out the low end a little bit, so it makes more sense. But it's kind of a shame when that's your only option.
Now, would I be correct in saying that your position would be, your preference would be to first get the speakers in the best position within the room, and then if you have to, start applying EQ?
Well, I have this, when I'm doing a lecture or something, I have a little chart, and I, these numbers are just off the top of my head, but my feeling is that about 70% of what I can accomplish in a room is speaker-listener placement. Getting the speakers and the listener and the boundaries and getting that interaction to be as flat as it possibly can be and as well matched as it possibly can be. Once I've done that, then it's a matter of trying to figure out where the acoustical treatments go and how much I can improve on that using acoustical treatments. And then at the very end, maybe the last 5% would be to apply EQ. So if you throw the other two out the window as options and all you've got is EQ, you're asking the speakers to do something that they don't really naturally want to do in the room. So you have to be really cautious about how you apply the EQ so that you don't overload the system or make the speakers do something, have some kind of weird resonance or something like that.
Yeah.
Because you're fighting the room at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Creamy Corncob in the chat room is asking, are those damping panels behind the towers? We in the picture that we saw there, you've got some acoustic treatments directly behind the speakers.
Yes.
And he wanted to know what those are.
Yeah, those are 4-inch compressed fiberglass panels, wrapped in fabric. So,
and their purpose is to reduce
those are absorbers. Yeah, those are absorbers. Yeah, and and I utilize the airspace. On the right speaker, it's as far out as the face of the fireplace, which is, I don't know, 18 to 24 inches out, maybe.
So there's there's an air gap behind that panel.
Well, yeah, there's air behind the panel. So I want to try to use an air gap as much as possible because that helps me to absorb lower frequencies than the basic 4-inch panel right up against the wall would absorb. So, and then the left speaker, it's kind of cutting across the corner. So there's some air behind that panel as well.
Creamy Corncob is also asking, spiking towers and sub enclosures, in other words, putting spike feet on them,
Yeah.
Is that key to isolating the cabinet and reducing standing waves?
No, that won't reduce standing waves. Standing waves
Okay.
are, based on your room dimensions. No, it just helps to eliminate, resonance in the speakers and tightens up the bass. I mean, when I spike a pair of speakers, I can never measure any difference in the frequency response. It doesn't show up like that, but it's certainly something that we can hear. And so, it just tightens the bass up. And, it's a good thing. I believe in isolating the cabinet from the floor. Well, especially if your floor is not very well built and you're getting a lot of resonance out of the floor. But, yeah, so that's there. I absolutely believe in isolating the speakers from the floor.
Okay, cool. Well, listen, we got a lot more to talk about, but before we do, I'd like to thank one of our sponsors for this episode, which is Epson. Epson's revolutionary EcoTank line of printers for home and office introduce a new age in printing. The new EcoTank ET4550 wireless all-in-one printer doesn't use ink cartridges. Instead, it features an innovative refillable ink tank, earning it the title of CES 2016 Innovation Awards honoree. The EcoTank ET4550 comes with enough ink to print up to 11,000 black pages or 8,500 color pages, equivalent to about 50 ink cartridge sets. You're loaded and ready to print for up to 2 years. Powered by Epson's leading-edge precision core technology, it delivers high-speed, vivid colors and laser-quality black text. Plus, auto two-sided printing, a 30-page auto document feeder, and easy wireless printing from tablets and smartphones. All EcoTank printers deliver an unbeatable combination of convenience and value with ultra-low-cost replacement ink bottles. Epson recently released their Creative Print app, making it easier to preserve your Instagram and Facebook photos. Download the app to create personalized photo collages, custom greeting cards, stationery, and coloring book templates. You can also print photos directly onto CDs and DVDs. Be creative on the go. Print from your mobile device to a variety of compatible Epson all-in-one printers within your wireless network. Visit epson.com/ecotank today to transform the way your home, office, or work group prints. For the best combination of ease and value, turn to the new Epson EcoTank printers. That's epson.com/ecotank. And we thank Epson very much for their support of Home Theater Geeks. Epson, exceed your vision. Speaking of exceeding vision, or hearing anyway, I'm talking with Bob Hodas, noted acoustician, about some of the projects he's been working on lately. And Bob, you also, in addition to working with this client of the installer or the retailer, you also worked on his own showroom. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that room, that's kind of an interesting space. It was a leftover spot. These guys weren't originally home stereo dealers. And
like a stereo store, a dying breed.
It wasn't a stereo store. Actually, these guys did high-end car audio. And so, but their clients were always asking them about, well, what should I do at my house? So they thought it would be a good idea to get a couple lines of products and sort of, get in the business, which turned out to be a really good idea because they already had a built-in clientele. They didn't have to go looking for anybody. But they had this room upstairs above the shop that they wanted to use. And this room, gosh, I wish I had pictures of the whole room. This is a picture of the most symmetrical portion of the room. And you can see that the windows aren't placed symmetrically in the room. when you look in the corners, you can see the left side has a corner and the right side doesn't even have a corner. That piece is just cut off. There's a pillar behind that thing there. And just to the right of the couch is a stairwell that comes up into the room with a safety wall there. And then behind the couch is some other weird, it's like a big cement block in the back half of the room that goes up about 4 feet or something. And then there, and then on the other, then the other side of the room, there's a door. And I mean, it's just, the whole thing is just kind of a mess symmetrically. So when I got into this space, they actually had the speakers on the opposite wall also, or not the opposite wall, but, kitty corner. So they were trying to make the room work so that you came up the stairs and you came out behind the seating area, and all that made a lot of sense aesthetically, but it was pretty awful regarding frequency response.
Yeah.
So let's in fact bring up if you could get show long FR up here, and you can see this was actually after I'd worked on the room for a couple hours trying to make it to be, once again, make it what they actually desired as far as a visual experience in the space. And you can see how unmatched, once again, the low frequencies are.
Man,
and
really unmatched.
Yeah, really unmatched. So actually better than the last space, but it was way worse than this before I even started on the room, the way they originally had the room set up. So
you take a measurement. You take a measurement right when you first get there just to see what's going on.
Oh yeah. Hey, I mean, I've been in people's rooms where they'd been working on their rooms for, I've been in people's spaces, some audiophile spaces where they, had their room set up for a year or two, and they'd been tweaking and tweaking and tweaking the whole time. And they, through a series of listenings, they got the room sounding really pretty good and had a really good balance on the speaker systems. So they developed their ear, and, and they got, they took a long time. The advantage I have is that I've got this analysis computer that lets me do in a day what could take people months to do, if they're sitting around listening. And some of the things like integrating a subwoofer at the proper phase crossing, you could never do by ear, and these are things that I'm a phase nut, and I measure, phase is just as important as frequency to me. So these are the type of things that an analyzer allows you to do quickly. I show up at somebody's place and we expect to have a great result, at the end of the day. Anyway, you can just show that trace again, but you can see, phase-wise, it's not matching, and frequency-wise, it's way off. So then, I worked and worked. I couldn't make it work on this wall, so I said, we have to turn this room 90 degrees, which we did. And then we started all over again. At the end of the day, if you could show the show short FR, this is the match that we wound up with, acoustic match. And this was, this is a pretty good, darn good match. And we really didn't have, at that time, we didn't have any acoustics, any acoustic treatments to work with. So
this is without acoustic treatments, what we're seeing here.
This is without acoustic treatments, yes. Which is very manageable. There's a lot we could do with acoustic treatments when we get down to it. I had recommended for him some still point aperture panels for his room. And
what are those?
Those are sort of combo diffusion, absorption, types of there. It's sort of a multi-function panel that Still Points is making. Still Points makes these isolation feet for gear and speakers, and they're getting into this panel area. And I've used their panels in a number of installations at this point, and I found them to be quite effective. And they're really good too for just kind of toning down the reverb structure of the room without putting up some big amount of absorption. And so I recommend that his issues in the showroom were that, I mean, the reverb time was pretty far out there because it was just all, it was a bunch of odd angles, and it was, all sheetrock. So
pretty reflective.
Yeah, pretty reflective. So we, I recommended that, he get the thing more under control so that he could focus on what's coming out of the direct sound of the speakers, and just pick up a couple of first order reflection points with the Still Points panels, and then do some reverb control in the back with a few more panels, which he said he has done, and that it really worked out well. But yeah, that, if you look at that shot once again, that's pretty tight for not having any acoustic treatments, and especially in a room that is as whacked out symmetrically as possible. That's one of the worst spaces I've been in, and so it's there's something there that a lot of people could come in and listen to this and relate pretty well to it. That's a really good, really fairly decent low end result, for a space.
Right. If we can go back to the photo of the room once more, I wanted to ask you about the fact that you've got these windows behind the speakers, and windows, of course, are very reflective. So yes. I'm amazed that you didn't block them with something more absorptive. Did you feel a need to do that?
Yeah, we didn't have anything. I mean, we're I'm having them put up some honeycomb blinds there, but which will help take some of the reflectivity out. I mean, remember, these speakers, they're only omnidirectional at below 200 hertz. So the windows really don't have any effect on, putting a honeycomb blind on the windows isn't going to have any effect on the low frequencies.
Yeah, right.
And by the time it's just the windows are part of the overall reverb structure of the room. They're not specifically in the way as far as the brain's concerned of interfering with the direct signal. So, by the time the speaker signal hits the back wall, which, has two different path length differences for the left and right speakers because of that big block that's on one side in the back of the room, it's more important just to sort of control the reflections off the back wall so that they don't ever get back to the speakers. So you don't create this flutter, flutter scenario. But because of the geometry, the speakers are up high. The windows are up high. The speakers are down low. When the direct signal from the speakers hits the back wall, most of it's going to go up and hit the ceiling first, and then bounce back down. It's like billiards. You got to look at this stuff. So. Yeah, the high frequency control, at that point it's reverb structure. But we wanted, the windows, like I said, honeycomb blinds would be just fine. And you don't want to be looking into light anyway. I mean, I encourage people to close their eyes when they're really trying to listen to music. Take the visual cues out of things, so that you could get absorbed in the sense of space that you get from a good recording. So those blinds are, are good enough for what that space is. When you have floor to ceiling windows, I mean, sometimes putting the speakers against the window wall can be advantageous because some of the low bass just passes through the windows and goes outside, and it never comes back into the listening position. It doesn't reflect back in out of phase. So you don't have to worry about that. So,
okay.
In some cases, having a window at the back of the speaker can be advantageous. But, once again, it's all depends on how it measures, how it measures to begin with,
Yeah, yeah. Rusty Bones in the chat room is asking an interesting question. What challenges does immersive audio present for tuning a room, like Atmos, DTSX, Oro, 3D? Have you done any rooms with those kinds of sound systems in them?
Well, yes, I have. Well, the number one thing when you start getting that many speakers in the room, your symmetry is really important.
Yet more important, even more important.
Yeah, more important. And the relationship, those speaker systems all have standards, okay? And so if the speakers don't get into the proper positioning in the room, you don't get the right ratios of distances, then you don't get the full effect of spending all that money on a fancy system like that. So that's important. The funny thing is that the first Atmos system that I did was in a room that was not symmetrical, a really wacky acoustic space, small, a real big challenge. It was a big challenge, but it turned out really quite well. And so we did treatments to try to kill, to try to kill some of the bass problems that they were having in that room. And then I did some diffusion in the back of the space to try to make the room appear to be a little larger than it really was, without getting in the way of all the surround speakers, because you had rear surrounds and side surrounds and the ceiling, left and right height speakers. So the placement of the diffusion that I used in the back of the room was important. And I also used some tuned membrane absorbers in the back, in the corners, because we had specific frequencies that we were trying to affect, trying to get rid of in that space as well. So I took advantage of having some bass traps that are actually tuned to specific frequencies, so that I could get very surgical in what I was trying to fix in the room. But once again, it still starts with the left and right speakers. I mean, nobody listens to immersive audio all the time. And when you've got the visual addition to a movie soundtrack, that, the audio system can be more forgiving, because you're not in there, you're
not paying entire attention to the audio.
Yeah, you're absorbed in what's going on the screen, and so the audio is regrettably secondary at that.
Well,
spot.
I've heard it said, and I think I've heard it said that George Lucas has said that audio is more than 50% of the movie experience. So it's still really important, obviously.
Yeah. Well, if you watch a movie with the sound turned off, the emotional impact is much less, because because of and that's the composer's contribution to creating feelings with the film.
Right.
And then, of course, no sound effects, no explosions or anything. But you turn off the music and the whole film gets flat. There's no doubt about it. But but it's not a sound quality issue. You could probably play that music over, a pair of, a pair of old funky speakers, and you're still getting the emotion from the, from the music coming out of the speakers, because you're hearing the music, so it's not about as much concentration on audio quality.
Mhm.
But so I always start with getting the left and right system as good as it can possibly be, and then try to match up the rest of the system to that. But it always starts with stereo setup.
This is what I was going to ask you. You start with the stereo, and then if you add surround, and then you add overheads, I mean, that must multiply the complexity of the situation exponentially as you add more speakers into the system, right?
Yeah, but a lot of these speakers are carrying different information. I mean, it's really important you get your phase correct, but generally, it's not the same information coming out of each speaker. So phase-wise, everything's more forgiving,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I got a couple more questions in the chat room, and I'm going to ask you those in a second. Before I do, though, I'd like to thank our other sponsor for this episode, which is Optical Cables by Corning. Corning can greatly improve your audio-video workflow with their strong, durable, and far-reaching Thunderbolt and USB 3.0 fiber optic cables. Whether you're into high-end video, photography, audio production, or computing, Optical Cables by Corning will allow you to build a convenient workspace through a superior long-distance connection. Corning's USB 3.0 and Thunderbolt cables are incredibly strong and flexible. They have exceptional cable runs of up to 60 meters or 200 feet for Thunderbolt and 50 meters or 165 feet for USB 3, making it so easy to move noisy, space-consuming devices away from your workspace. You can even bend or walk on Corning's cables. Even if they're tangled, it's no problem. They will keep transmitting at top speed. Optical Cables by Corning will help you achieve acoustic and electrical isolation so you can enjoy a clutter-free, peaceful working environment. Now, Universal Audio, which makes very high-end, really nice audio equipment for the professional market, relies on Optical Cables by Corning to achieve acoustic isolation in their studio where they test new equipment, such as their best-selling Thunderbolt audio interfaces. Instead of investing in multiple extenders, adapters, and cables, turn to Optical Cables by Corning to establish the connection you need with one simple, long-length cable. Optical Cables by Corning are available at all major electronics and professional AV retailers, including Apple stores, Amazon, B&H, and more. Optical Cables by Corning are longer, thinner, lighter, and stronger. Go to opticalcablesbycorning.com to learn more. And we thank Corning very much for their support of Home Theater Geeks. Bob, speaking of noisy equipment and isolating with long cables, is that something you deal with in terms of, you've got a stack of equipment and it's raising the noise floor in the room? Do you sometimes put equipment in a closet, isolated away from the actual listening room?
Yes, I do. In fact, I'm doing a listening room in a condo in New York right at the moment. The pair of Focal Stella Utopias and VTL 450 Series 3 amplifiers. And we're having to do a very long run from the preamp and equalizer to the amplifiers. It's ending up being about 40 feet of run. So, it's, the gear that, especially the stuff that's generating noise, needs to go into a closet so that, so it doesn't interfere with the listening process. Because some of the gear generates noise. I mean, then there's of course electronic noise, and electricity, noise of electricity and such. I mean, the systems, you generally want a system like that, especially in a condo, where you don't really have any control over what's coming into the building.
Right.
You want to have some type of noise control for the electronics.
Yeah, but long analog runs anyway certainly are susceptible to some degree to electronic noise and interference and so on, radio frequency interference, RFI, or electromagnetic interference, EMI.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful of that too, huh?
Yeah. Well, you have to kind of watch how you run your cables. You've got to get cables that are well shielded.
Yeah.
I mean, things can be pretty forgiving. You get a good shielded cable. I mean, one of the rules of thumb is never run an electrical cable, an AC cable next to an audio cable. But, with balanced, XLR cables that are well shielded, you can get away with more, than you can, let's say, especially with unbalanced cable. The RCA, unbalanced cables are much more susceptible to noise interference than your pro style XLR, conductor cables.
Right. Okay, I got a couple questions from the chat room. Let me pose them to you. Travis asks, could you put in some kind of split-second delay on an audio signal to bring the speaker reflections into sync? I don't see how, because if you delay the signal to the speaker, it's just that the reflections are going to be delayed by the same amount, right?
Are you trying to get my job?
No, not at all.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you delay the direct signal, you're going to delay the first order reflections as well.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in order to, I guess he's saying, okay, if you have to set your speakers up asymmetrically and you're sitting closer to the right speaker than you are to the left speaker, can you delay that signal? Yeah, you could delay it to get the thing more, to get the direct time arrival more into sync, but it's acoustically, it's not a desirable way to set your room up. Yeah.
Rusty Bones is asking, what are your ideal room measurements to start with?
No, I don't have any.
What about proportions of length to width to height?
There's this big amoeba shaped, golden ratio set of room ratios for modal response, and it varies, room to room. So, you almost never get a room that's, you often get rooms that people have been careful about, finding ratios that work modally, and that's great. And that's a good place to start. But, but there isn't one super ratio that is better than all the rest. There's a bunch of acceptable ratios.
Okay.
And I can't list them all because they vary based on, you have to go on to a website that talks about room ratios, and generally they'll show you this picture, you can get your height and width and length to intersect at certain points within this. Like I said, it's like an amoebic blob that where you'll get your modes all to interact. But when you were talking about room modes, I think that the boundary interference patterns are more important than the modal, the shape of the room and how the modal distribution works.
What do you mean by boundary interference patterns?
Well, I mean that the interaction of the speakers and the listener to their boundaries. So floor, ceiling, side walls, front, rear wall, those boundaries, the bounces that are occurring that are causing, delayed signals to mix back into the listening position, whether they're adding or subtracting, those, to me, have a greater effect on how the room's going to perform than the modal distribution of the room.
Okay.
That just comes out of my experience.
Okay.
Because I do plenty of rooms where people didn't pay any attention to modal distribution when they put their rooms together.
Okay. Emily the Strange is asking, what type of walls work work best, or do you recommend most? Wood, sheetrock, tile? I wouldn't think tile.
No, tile. Yeah, tile glass. You could shoot yourself in the foot pretty good with those guys.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a wood guy. I like the sound of wood. It's softer. It just for some reason has a better feel to me. But a lot of rooms are rock. A lot of houses are built out of sheetrock. Whatever the room is, I'm generally would like to have a stiff room. A room that's well built, good solid walls that aren't going to resonate. And then go from there. But my old, I just moved recently, and actually my new room has thankfully a really good modal distribution. I haven't tuned the room yet. I just got the speakers wired up and haven't started placement measurements. But it's all rock. And my old house, I was really fortunate, had a great audio space. It had an expansion ceiling, so that it was 9 feet in the front and 12 feet in the back. And the back wall was a combination of a fireplace, with brick and wood paneling. So it was nice and soft, and the wood was nice and soft. And one of the sides was wood, the other side was rock. But that room had a really great feel. So I'm in this space now that's all sheetrock, and I'm going to have to do something to tame it down. I mean, it's just like way too live.
You mentioned the angled ceiling, and I thought that surprised me a little bit, because you said you really liked symmetry. I guess an angled ceiling would be symmetrical, certainly. And Creamy Corncob in the chat room is saying an angled ceiling of any kind is more ideal than a box room. Would you agree?
Well, yeah, I guess I would agree. The thing about the angle, but it depends on I only agree if the angle of the ceiling is at least 7 degrees. Okay. Because otherwise it's not going to really help you out that much. I mean, 7 to 10 degrees is sort of an acceptable angle for playing sidewalls, let's say, in a recording studio. And so you don't want to just have the angle be effective at, frequencies 2K and above. You really want to have it have an even distribution, have it be just as effective at the low frequencies as it is at the high frequencies. And the thing about these angled ceilings is they take the direct signal from the speaker and they throw it to the back of the room so that it doesn't bounce back in and mix into your direct signal. And then when it's in the back of the room, you could do all kinds of things to treat those reflections once they get to the back of the room. It's easier to do. But you create what they call a reflection-free zone. Look at something that would be more like an orchestra hall, where you've got angled walls that throw sound into the back, But if it's a 15-foot room, deep, and you've got 8 feet in the front, and you've got 8.5 feet in the back or 9 feet in the back, it's not going to buy you very much. You're still going to wind up getting some direct signal bounced back from the ceiling into your listening space. You're going to have to treat it.
So you're saying that angled ceiling, angled walls reflect the sound back towards the back of the room. I often have heard that splayed walls, angled ceilings were good because they discouraged the buildup of room modes. Is that not also true?
That is true. Yes. Yes. But we don't have any way of predicting how that's going to react. So when you start to put angles into rooms, all the modal predictions are based on a perfectly rectangular room that's built out of cement.
Huh.
So as soon as you start changing angles, you get unpredictable modal response from the room. So, I guess that's one of the negatives, but, you will break up your room modes, if you...
But
if
in
you
an
angle
unpredictable
walls
way.
In an unpredictable way, yes.
Mm-hmm. SoundPro69 is asking, would like to know what you think about the speaker setup practice that some people call, quote unquote, master set. The idea being is centered about finding a place where both speakers act as one piston pressurizing the room.
Never heard of that.
Have you heard of this? Never heard of it?
Nope,
okay.
Nope, never heard of it. Never heard of it. Well, if you've got your low end properly phase aligned, and you've got it behaving symmetrically with a matched phase, then yeah, I can see how you would be pressurizing the air equally out of both speakers. That seems like something that would be the right thing to do. I don't know about the technique or anything, but that's, generally, what I want to try to do is get both speakers to have the same, time movement in time. And that would be the ultimate, combination of air pressurization. So I guess I'll agree with it without really knowing, I don't know
that particular term.
That portion of it. Yeah.
Rusty Bones asked some time ago about geodesic domes. What do you think about those as an acoustic space?
It's you've created this focusing space. Generally, that's not a good idea when you're trying to listen to music. Where you get all these reflections really focused right back into your listening position. People generally are trying to do just the opposite. So, curved walls, walls that are curved so that they focus the sound back into the listening position. Those things never, or curved ceilings, generally those aren't good spaces to work in acoustically.
You said earlier that EQ is kind of the last resort. Once you've placed things properly and done the acoustic treatments, you've taken care of like 95%, hopefully, of tuning the room. EQ kind of takes you the last little bit if you need it. What do you think about these auto room correction systems like Odyssey, Trinov? Some companies have their own version of it. These are typically found in AV receivers, although sometimes they're in more high-end pre-pros. What's your general thought on those? Okay.
Well, some of them are better than others. Let's just put it that way. If you ask any equalization system to make up for placement issues, it's going to do things to the signal that create nonlinearities within the speaker. It's going to ask the speaker to do, to act in a way that normally it wouldn't act in the room. And so, so I can't say that I'm a fan of just taking a system and setting your speakers up and then letting the EQ go and do all the work. I mean, it's just not the way I work. And like I said, and the results usually aren't very good. And, there are, once again, and there are some of the systems I think just sound absolutely horrible. And some of them do a pretty good job, and in a lot of cases you get what you pay for, but not always.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Without getting too political, I mean, I've got to work with pretty much anything, with everybody's systems. So
of course, I understand.
Like I said, I'm just going to say that some of it's crap and some of it is pretty darn good, but I haven't seen any of it do what I can do. Mostly because, it's you're asking the system's trying to do something that's doesn't start with speaker placement.
Right. I think your point is very good.
Most home theaters. I mean, you have to say most home theaters go into a room and the speakers go into the front wall or onto the front wall, and that's the end of it. And there isn't much else you can do besides EQ the system.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think your point is well taken. That you really want to start with tuning the room in terms of placement of speaker and listener, and then acoustic treatments as required. And then if you were to apply one of these auto room tuning things, they wouldn't actually probably have to do much.
That's what one would hope.
Yes.
That's what one would hope.
Yes.
And you want it to really work mostly in the low frequencies. You don't really want it doing upper frequencies that are mostly going to be, you're going to have rough frequency response because of the first order reflections. So you don't want to be EQing for first order reflections. You really want to treat those acoustically, because as you move your head just a little bit, you're going to be changing the ratio of the direct signal to the reflected signal, and the comb filtering is going to switch too. And so the EQ is going to be fixed for a position. So sometimes, you could get yourself into trouble, something that was a hole that you might have corrected or a dip that you might have corrected as you move your head around might become just the opposite. And then you've sort of doubled, how bad it was to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's, I haven't found the computer that can equalize, that's got the artificial intelligence of a human being at this point. Let's just say that.
Right.
But they can do some great things with phase. There's some of these systems can do a good job with phase alignment.
Mm-hmm. A Beatmaster says that you mentioned acoustic software and asks if you use Cara, C-A-R-A.
I use a Meyer Sim system, Meyer Sim System 3.
From Meyer Sound?
From Meyer Sound Laboratories in Berkeley.
Mm-hmm. Great company.
It's 48th octave resolution and does phase, frequency, and coherence in real time.
Mm-hmm. What would you say is the percentage of your reliance on measurement versus subjective listening?
Well, I'd say that we always start off with measurement, but that's not the end all be all. One of the reasons, I was a recording engineer for many years and a musician, and I think one of the reasons I've been successful is that I know what the engineers and producers and the musicians want to hear in the studio in order to get product out that translates when you take it out of their spaces.
Mm-hmm.
So the ears really are the final product. You could get something that measures really well in the frequency domain, but if the phase, if you're not measuring phase and the phase doesn't quite line up, when you sit down to listen to it, you're going to go, gee, something's not quite right. So, you always have to listen, and every speaker system has a different personality as well. And so while we can say, well, we're shooting for a relatively flat frequency response, that's just sort of a ballpark that you're going to get into. And at the end, it's always about listening at the end. Because that's what it's all about, is listening.
Sure.
And then you make your adjustments based on what you hear. So, I got into the business listening first and measuring later. So, I learned what music was supposed to sound like. And so, but there are things that, like I said, measuring phase, setting up a subwoofer, finding that proper phase interaction between the sub and its satellite speaker, really difficult to do by ear. It takes a long, long time. And generally people pay me to do it in a day. So, so I measure phase, and that's the way to do that.
Well, because the ear is not that sensitive to static phase. I mean, it's certainly sensitive to changing phase. A phase shifter is a very distinct sound. You know exactly what it is when you hear it. But, if a speaker, I guess what we're talking about is the interaction of phase between more than one speaker. If you just have one speaker playing, and it's got a phase of 90 degrees or 180 degrees compared to some reference, you're not going to hear that.
Well, I mean, it's going to show up. Yeah, it's going to show up as a dip or a peak. I mean, that's, if you were going to measure it, and even listen to it, you're going to get a dip or a peak depending on where what the phase interaction is between the two frequencies. So the concept is to get zero phase. That, let's say you set a crossover point at 80 hertz. You want the main speaker phase and the subwoofer phase to be very close to the same thing at 80 hertz. So when you combine the two speakers, you don't affect the phase of the primary speaker, so that you basically end up with the same phase trace. And then you don't get some big cancellation at the crossover point or something like that. It sounds smooth, and it actually helps make the subwoofer disappear. If you do this right, then you don't even know that there's a subwoofer integrated into the system.
Yeah. But that's not an easy thing to do, and that's why people hire you to do it, because you know what you're doing.
Yeah, I've been doing it a while.
A while, yes. Well, listen, we've come to the end of a very interesting hour. I want to thank you so much for being here and sharing your expertise with us. And next week you will be at the show in Irvine, and I look forward to seeing you there. Yep.
Please stop by and say hello. And
of course.
This has been a lot of fun. Thank you for inviting me once again.
Oh, my pleasure. And won't be the last time if I have anything to say about it.
Well, I guess we'll see how the numbers come in, right?
Well, I've enjoyed it immensely, and I know people in the chat room have as well. So thank you so much for being here.
All right. Well, thank you, Scott. Take care, and thanks to your team for putting this together.
You bet. That's Bob Hodas. You can find out more about what he does at bobhodas.com. You can find me at avsforum.com. You can email me at scott@twit.tv. And you can follow me on Twitter at htgeekscott and at avsforum. You can always find previous episodes of Home Theater Geeks right here at twit.tv and on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/twithometheatergeeks. Next week, as I said, I will be at the Home Entertainment Show, otherwise known as The Show. And I will be doing the podcast live from the show. I'll have a number of people coming into the room where I'll be to chat for a little while. They will include people like Andrew Jones, well-known speaker designer, Mark Waldrop, advocate of high-res audio, and several others that I know will be very interesting. So I do hope you will join me for that. Until then, geek out.